which can be for because of three reasons. Either because whenever there is exercise, there is because of alpha receptors, there is also, I'm so sorry, because of there is basically the system of vascular resistance decreases, and because there is exercise, it increases, and there's a fixed cardiac output because of a fixed valve obstruction that can lead to syncope because of a decreased cerebral perfusion. And the second part is, I'm sorry, yeah, the second point is if there are arrhythmias in this patient, that can also lead to decrease in stroke volume and lead to syncope. The third symptom is dyspnea, which occurs later in the disease when the patient, the LV has decompensated and can no longer compensate for the obstruction by hypertrophy. Then the patient will go into congestive heart failure. So just coming quickly into the examination. So in examination, there on the characteristic pulse in these patients can be a pulsus parvus retardus, which is a diminished, delayed carotid upstroke because of delayed emptying of the LV. And the apical impellance will not be displaced, but will be sustained and diffuse. Sustained because there is LV pressure overload. On the murmur is classically a harsh systolic ejection murmur, heard best the second right IC to the aortic side, with the patient leaning forward. There is late peaking of the murmur, which is characteristically crescendo decrescendo associated with an ejection click. It radiates to the carotids, which is important to differentiate from a subvalvular or supravalvular obstruction. There's a soft single S2, or there might even be a paradoxical split of the S2 due to delaying emptying of the LV and the delayed closure of the aortic valve. The patient might also have an S4 if the atrial kick is present and because of decreased LV compliance, and may also be associated with palpebral thrill. So Ross and Braunwald described the national history, and in which they followed asymptomatic and symptomatic patients, and they showed that in the asymptomatic phase, the AS has a long latent phase and the near normal survival compared to normal individuals, with the risk of sudden death being close to less than 1% per year. But in asymptomatic individuals, the mean valvular gradient increases by 7 millimeters mercury per year, and the AVA decreases by 0.1 centimeter square. And 1/3 of these patients will become symptomatic in 2 years. Now, once they do become symptomatic, now it depends what the symptom is. If the patient has angina, then there is a survival of 50% of patients for 5 years. If they have syncope, then there's a 50% chance of them surviving 3 years. And if dyspnea, heart failure or dyspnea has set in, then there is a mean survival goes down to less than 2 years. So coming down to the ACC guidelines, the recent guidelines. So they have basically characterized AS into 4 stages. A is patients at risk of MS, for example, patients with bicuspid aortic valve or other predisposing conditions. B is patients who have mild to moderate AS. C is asymptomatic severe AS. Now, C is further divided into C1 and C2. C1 is without LV dysfunction, and C2 is with LV dysfunction. This is defined as less than 50% of EF. D is symptomatic severe AS, which is further divided into 3 categories. First is symptomatic with severe high gradient. Second is symptomatic severe low flow, low gradient AS with reduced ejection fraction. And third is symptomatic severe low flow, low gradient AS with preserved ejection fraction, in which the stroke volume index of these patients go low due to severe diastolic dysfunction. So in the guidelines, like the diagnosis is supposed to be made, has given obviously a 1A recommendation for echocardiography, in which the things that we measure is the max transaortic velocity, the mean pressure gradient, which is measured by the Bernoulli's equation in echo, the valve area, which is again on echocardiography is measured by continuity principle, which measures the physiological area. Additional measurement which has been described in the guidelines is the ratio of velocity in the LVOT to the ratio of velocity in the narrowed aortic valve, which is also known as the aortic velocity index. This can also be used in certain terms of, we can use the ratio of VTI of LVOT and VTI of narrowed aortic valve. This is a new measurement which is coming up because it is independent of body side and preload. The normal ratio is close to 1, but if the ratio goes below 0.25, that corresponds to a valve area of 25% of normal, which is consistent with severe AS. The second 2A recommendation is for patients who in which you can do a CT calcium score. This is especially good in patients who have a low flow, low gradient AS, in which we cannot clearly define the severity or the cause for it. The sex-specific Agatston unit thresholds for diagnosis is 1300 in women and 2000 in men. Another investigation that we can use for low flow, low gradient, severe symptomatic AS is dobutamine stress echocardiography. This has to be, we have to do this under appropriate clinical and hemodynamic monitoring. And the max dose that we use is 20 mics per kg per minute. And if the patient fails to show increase in stroke volume of more than 20%, it shows a lack of contractile reserve, which I'll come to later what that means. And if patient is symptomatic, then we should not do it because that will just decompensate the patient further. One entity that I want to mention here is called pseudo AS, which is basically I'll come to the whole proper understanding about it later, but it basically, it is an entity in which the patient has low flow, low gradient AS with reduced ejection fraction. But once we give him a dobutamine challenge, or dobutamine stress echocardiography, the valve area increases and the volume flow also increases, because the primary issue with that patient was not aortic valve area or gradient, was primarily LV dysfunction, which we have overcome by giving dobutamine. If the patient had actual AS, no matter how much dobutamine you give the patient, he has a fixed valve obstruction, so the valve area will not increase, but the gradient may or may not increase. That is depending on contractile reserve. The third thing again we can use is cardiac catheterization, which is usually used in our cases when we want to rule out coexistent coronary artery disease, but can be used as a discrepancy between clinical and echocardiography evaluation. Now, in catheterization, the area is calculated by the Gorlin formula, which measures the anatomic area in which we need the cardiac output. Hence, we use the Fick or thermodilution principle. And exercise testing is also recommended and can be used in a subset of asymptomatic severe patients to force symptoms to come. But again, it's contraindicated in symptomatic AS patients. And one important thing in the guidelines was that patients with exercise-provoked symptoms should be considered symptomatic, even if clinical history is equivocal. So if patient has exercise-provoked symptoms, he'll come straight away into symptomatic category. So these are the recommendations for the diagnosis, which I just covered. Coming up to the follow-up. Now, in natural history, the severe AS patients who have aortic velocity of more than 4 meters per second have a rate of progression in which the event-free survival rate is only 30 to 50% at 2 years. So most of these patients, about 1/3, will become symptomatic by 2 years. And like I said, with moderate AS, the velocity increases by 0.3 meters per second, gradient increases by 7 millimeters, and the valve area decreases by 0.1 centimeter square per year. And in patients who have higher risk, like patients with bicuspid aortic valve or older patients, they have a more rapid progression. So this is like the whole thing I've explained to you till now. One thing is important is the grading, so which I did not cover, so I'm covering it here. So mild AS is patients with a max velocity of 2 to 3 meters per second and the gradient of less than 20. Moderate AS is max velocity of 3 to 4 with a gradient of 20 to 40. This comes in stage B. Then stage C1 or severe, how one will we say severe AS, is when the velocity increases more than equal to 4 meters per second or the gradient is more than 40. Another entity here is very severe AS, in which the flow velocity is more than equal to 5 or the mean of gradient is more than 60. And in severe AS, the AVA is valve area is less than or equal to 1 centimeter square, or more importantly, the index that is supposed to be a better predictor of outcomes is 0.6 centimeter square per meter square body surface area. And like I said, C2 is basically asymptomatic severe AS with LV dysfunction, which will change the recommendations for timing of intervention, which I'll just come to. And this is the same. So symptomatic severe AS is D1, D2, D3. D1 is symptomatic severe high gradient AS. So there is no doubt about what this is. Doubt basically comes when there's a symptomatic severe low flow, low gradient AS with reduced LVF. So this can be actual severe AS or pseudo AS, which I just covered. So if the patient has pseudo AS, then we don't have to worry about the AS per se. We have to start worrying about the LV dysfunction. And D3 is low flow, low gradient AS with normal LVF. Now this occurs because the patient has severe diastolic dysfunction. So the stroke volume decreases because of restrictive diastolic filling. And the criteria for this is the stroke volume index for these patients is less than 35 ml per meter square. So coming briefly about the medical management given in the guidelines. So the guidelines have recommended giving antihypertensive in early disease of the patients, like stage A, stage B. These should not be given in fixed valvular obstruction late in the disease, because if there is fixed valvular obstruction and we give vasodilators, that will again further might cause problems with cerebral perfusion. But we should be giving them in the beginning, because studies have shown there's a 56% higher rate of ischemic cardiovascular events and twofold higher mortality rate in patients with AS with hypertension. So in the initial stages, we should try and correct that, but it does not cause any impact in the progression of valve stenosis. And in theory, ACE inhibitors are supposed to be better because they also have the potential added benefit of in LV fibrosis. Diuretics should not be given in these patients because, like I said, the patient already has issues with LV filling. So if we give diuretics, that may cause stroke, decrease in stroke volume further. The second drugs that is recommended is statins, which should be given. Again, this does not cause any impact on progression of valve stenosis per se, but it does, studies has shown to reduce ischemic events by 20%. This is the recommendation. So there's a recommendation of 1A, recommendation of 1 for patients in the initial stages to get antihypertension therapy. And one more thing is important is that there is no added benefit of giving antihypertensive if the patient is normotensive. It is only giving benefit if the patient is hypertensive. And again, class 1 indication of statin therapy. Now coming to surgical indications. So the class 1 surgical indication is for any symptom, severe AS with LV dysfunction, which is stage C2, D1, D2, D3, C2, and any symptomatic AS. Stage C1, which is asymptomatic severe AS, class 1 indication is only with other concomitant cardiac surgery. Class 2A indication is either very severe AS, like I mentioned, which is in more than 5 millimeter per second velocity or more than 60 millimeters mercury gradient, or stage C1, which is asymptomatic severe AS with normal LV, in cases in which we have decreased exercise intolerance, or the serum BNP level is 3 times normal. Serum BNP level in studies has shown to show subclinical heart failure in these patients. So in case the patient has 3 times the normal BNP level, that is again in asymptomatic severe AS, that is again a class 2A recommendation. Or the rate of progression of AS is aortic flow velocity is more than 0.3 meters per second per year. The class 2B indication is stage C1 with progressive decline in LVF in 3 serial imaging studies, or moderate AS with other concomitant cardiac surgery. This is the same thing that I just explained to you in an algorithm. So that's what I've tried to explain. So coming to the evidences from which they picked up the guidelines. So in 2020, Kang et al. Had published this article in which they had taken 145 asymptomatic cases and randomly assigned them to either early surgery or conservative treatment. Now, these were severe AS patients with who were asymptomatic, and they found that in the conservative group, in the graphs you can see, the cumulative incidence for death from cardiovascular causes or death from any cause was much more than patients who were assigned early surgery. And these were done in patients who had a flow velocity of more than 4.5 or mean gradient of more than 50. Nishimura et al. In 2016 had also published a paper in which they had tried to measure the AV flow velocity progression. So in 140 patients of asymptomatic severe AS, they had seen that dyslipidemia, moderate to severe calcification, and first year aortic valve velocity progression of more than 0.22 meters per second per year were independent events of cardiac events, predictors of cardiac events. I'm sorry. And this was the paper they had published. So coming to the surgery, we all know the aortic valve replacement in AS. There is as of now the repairs are not indicated for aortic stenosis. So in this, we do a median stenotomy We put the patient on the cardiopulmonary bypass by putting an aortic cannula and a single stage venous cannula, the RA. Cardioplegia is administered, and in these cases, they are usually given both antegrade and retrograde route, as there is LV hypertrophy, so as to provide proper myocardial protection. And then we further go into the aortotomy. After identifying the leaflets, we're supposed to excise them, and then we size the aortic annulus. Now, when we implant our prosthesis, there are two techniques that we can use: the supraannular or the intraannular technique. The supraannular technique has the advantage that in which we can use a larger prosthesis. But in this technique, there's an increased risk of paravalvular leaks in severely calcified leaflets or pannus formation. The intraannular technique, on the other hand, will have decreased risk of paravalvular leaks and pannus formation. But again, the prosthesis size might have to reduce. In cases of prosthesis patient mismatch, in which there is severe PPM, we can use aortic root enlargement procedures by going down to the subaortic segment to enlarge the annulus, which will be covered in the subsequent lecture. So just giving a brief about the complications of AVR. So the most common early complication that we're worried about is the neurological complication, which is about 1.5%. The risk factor is low EF, old age, ascending aortic calcification, or female sex. And about 1/3 of these patients of AS after AVR will experience post-operative delirium. The second most important complication is heart block, which is basically because of manipulation of the RCC and NCC junction, which might damage the conduction system. Now, this can be transient due to tissue edema and can subsequently resolve. But if the patient is dependent on the pacemaker for 7 to 10 days, then we'll have to discuss with the cardiologist to go ahead with the permanent pacemaker implantation. Other complications that will occur eventually in these patients is thromboembolism, anticoagulation, and bleeding complications because of either subtherapeutic INR levels or supratherapeutic levels. Patient might have prosthetic valve endocarditis subsequently in these valves because they are foreign bodies and they are predisposed to infections if their bacteremia is present. There may be structural valve degeneration in case you put a bioprosthetic valve, and if the valve was improperly put, there might be paravalvular leak, which can also subsequently lead to hemolysis. Small slide on post-operative care that you have to worry about is because these patients have decreased LV compliance because of LV diastolic dysfunction. We have to remember that they're highly dependent on higher than usual preload. So they will have higher LV filling pressures in post-operative care. And another important point is that we should avoid atrial arrhythmias for the same fact that they're very dependent on the atrial kick for LV filling. So post-surgery, there is usually because of AS, patients have increased LVM or increased left ventricular mass, and which can be because of either concentric LVH in AS or even eccentric hypertrophy in AR. Now, if this is present, it is a strong negative prognostic factor for subsequent morbidity. But if done early, AVR done early, it does cause the myocardium to remodel and the LVM to regress. Now, this can occur in the first 18 months to 5 years of age. But if done, once the patient has recorded severe systolic dysfunction of the LV or very old age, then LV remodeling might not occur. And in recent advances, the microsomal protein of 133A is currently being explored to see whether it's a potential predictor of LV modeling in patients with AS to further help in prognostication. Slide on prosthesis patient mismatch. This is a term which we use in which we are trying to correlate the post-op gradient. We're trying to correlate. We're trying to find out whether the patient will have a post-op transprosthetic gradient by correlating the effective orifice area indexed to the body surface area of the patient. Now, the effective orifice area of any valve can be measured on echo using the continuity principle or by the Gordon formula on catheterization. An index EOA of 0.65 to 0.85 is moderate, will be termed as moderate ppm, and if less than 0.65 will be termed as severe ppm. Now, there are two groups of studies that are there. So the significance is still controversial, with some studies showing that ppm, if it occurs after AVR, will lead to less improvement in functional status and increased long-term mortality, while other groups showing no significant survival. But one thing was for sure, if patients have LV dysfunction or of old age and younger patients who are more active, they are more susceptible to the long-term effects of processes patient mismatch. So that was it about AS. Now coming to AR. AR is basically the insufficiency of the aortic valves to stop the diastolic filling of the LV from the aorta. Now, this, like in the beginning, I told you, can be attributed to any of the components of the functional unit of the aortic valve, which can start from the ST junction to the sinus of valsalva to the aortic cusps and the ventricular aortic junction. In my talk today, I will be basically talking about the aortic valve repairs, and I will not be going into the causes of AR because of either ascending aortic dilatation or sinus of valsalva dilatation. But I will mention.
Avyam?
So, yes, sir.
I would think that I mean, if you could just complete the aortic stenosis section, low flow, low gradient, this thing, and leave the aortic regurgitation for a separate class, because aortic valve repair is a very important topic nowadays, and I
Okay,
think it would do justice to have a separate class on aortic regurgitation and aortic valve repairs.
Okay, sir.
If you
Okay,
could just
sir.
stick to aortic stenosis today, that would be better. My
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. I'll do that next week then, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. So that was it then, sir.
No, you would have to talk on low flow, low gradient, pseudo AS, low flow, low gradients with preserved ejection fraction. Do you have any slides on that?
No, sir. I just whatever I had, I presented. I was.
And something on aortic root enlargement. No. No, if you haven't done any of that, then of course, then you can continue with your aortic regurgitation.
Because aortic, there's a separate lecture on aortic root, so I mentioned aortic root enlargement, but I've not.
No, but we haven't discussed what is low flow, low gradient AS, and what is the indicate. I mean, what are the prognostic factors in low flow, low gradient? Have we? Oh, this is just no. You see, when patients have when should you operate? When they don't have a cardiac contractile reserve, what is the it's not that you don't have to operate them, it just changes their prognosis. So what are those factors, all those things? Why does that happen? Contractile reserve, and if there is a good contractile reserve, what do you expect? And what is low flow, low gradient with preserved ejection fraction?
So
how does that change the prognosis, or how does it improve do the symptoms improve after surgery? All these things, I thought aortic stenosis we would cover that. What you have said, I mean, you have talked about what this thing definition, but contractile reserve nahi hota to kya hota hai? Matlab there, I mean, you still operate those patients, but I mean, the prognosis is very different. You may or may not operate, but the prognosis is, I mean, there is this thing, if you operate, what is the survival? And if you don't operate, what is the survival? There is a comparison. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we haven't covered low flow, low gradient at all then. I thought you had them coming. So that's why I asked you to stop at AR. So now you continue with AR. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Sorry, sir. I'll put it next time.
Not sorry. Okay. We can have these things later. Yeah.
So coming to AR, sir, the etiology of AR, the patient AR can be either acute or chronic. In terms of that depends on the etiology, and that will also differ in the patient's pathophysiology eventually. In acute AR, the patient that can occur because of either blunt trauma, aortic dissection, infective endocarditis, acute prosthetic valve dysfunction, or post-aortic balloon valvotomy. In chronic AR can occur because of calcific degeneration, rheumatic disease, infective endocarditis, bicuspid aortic valve, Marfan syndrome, aortitis, and annuloaortic ectasia or myxomatous degeneration. Now, the pathophysiology in acute AR is that there is sudden increase in left ventricular end diastolic volume because of sudden aortic insufficiency. Now, because it's sudden, the ventricle does not have time to adapt, and there'll be rapid increase in the LV-EDP, which the LV will not be able to accommodate. Therefore, there will be a decrease in stroke volume, and the patient's cardiac output will fall acutely, and it can lead to hypotension and shock. these patients will have a compensatory tachycardia, which will basically help to shorten the diastolic filling time and try to reduce the regurgitation fraction. But these patients will eventually have will present to us with hemodynamic emergency. In contrast to that, chronic AR is a slow and insidious progression of the LV dilatation, and it occurs. The LV dilatation basically occurs because there is increase in LV end diastolic volume, which eventually will lead to increase in LV EDP and increase in wall stress. Now, because there is dilatation of LV, the LV will try to overcompensate this by increasing every total stroke volume, because some volume is going to come back as a regurgitation. So there is so to do this, there is compensatory eccentric hypertrophy, which is different from from concentric hypertrophy in LVH. Now, because of increase in stroke volume coupled with an increase in LV-EDP due to regurgitation, the patient has that characteristic wide pulse pressure, and but eventually even this will get exhausted, and the patient will land up with congestive heart failure will not be able to maintain forward cardiac output. So the pressure volume loop in AR will look like this, in which immediately at the upper left corner where the aortic valve will close, the ventricle will start filling immediately because of aortic insufficiency, thereby increasing the end diastolic volume of the heart, and which will, because the end diastolic volume has increased, the heart has to work more because it has to maintain forward flow. So the force of contraction will increase, and the ventricular peak pressure will increase, and so will the stroke volume. And as long as the LV does not decompensate, the ES end systolic volume is still minimal. But once the LV starts decompensating, the end systolic volume will start increasing, and along with which the stroke volume will fall. So I will come to the natural history, but it depends. The natural history of AR will depend on severity, in which the mild to moderate AR affect activity minimally, and severe AR patients, because the LV is trying to compensate, so there is a long latent phase during which the patient is asymptomatic. Bono and colleagues in 91 had presented a paper in 91 about the natural history of AR, in which they had said that the progressive dilatation of LV is a high risk factor in these patients, and the patient at risk of sudden death are those with an end diastolic dimension of more than 75 or end systolic dimension of more than 55. And once symptoms do occur, the survival falls rapidly and maybe as low as 2 years in patients with heart failure receiving medical therapy alone. So clinical features, coming to that, in acute AR, they are more, it's an emergency. So there'll be sudden cardiovascular collapse. The patient will have cardiogenic shock presenting with all the features of tachycardia, hypotension, may have decreased urine output. And they may often exhibit ischemic symptoms because there is decreased forward output, forward flow, there'll be decreased supply. And because the end diastolic volume is increased, there'll be increased demand. In chronic AR, the patients are usually asymptomatic in latent phase, but once compensatory responses exhaust and the LV starts to decompensate, the patient will start having heart failure symptoms, namely exertional dyspnea, orthopnea, or PND. Patient may, because of dilatation, may also have palpitations and angina. The ventricular impulse will be displaced laterally. The apex might be hyperdynamic and diffuse. The pulse pressure in these patients is widened, which is a sign of severity on clinical examination, with it being severe aortic regurgitation if the pulse pressure is more than 80 millimeter mercury. The classic murmur is early diastolic high-pitched blowing with a decrescendo pattern, with diaphragm at the third left ICS in the orbs area, with the patient leaning forward in deep expiration. The duration of murmur is also related to the severity of AR, and in severe ARs may even become holodystolic, and isometric sizes accentuate the murmur. Another murmur which can, on clinical examination, tell us about severity is the Austin-Flint murmur, which is an apical mid-diastolic murmur, and in which there is no systolic accentuation to differentiate it from an MS. The relative MS results because the AR jet will push the AML in a sort of a stenose state and cause diastolic murmur. And if present, this murmur denotes at least a moderate AR. Another sign for severity in AR is the Hill sign, which is basically systolic lower limb blood pressure subtracted from the systolic upper limb blood pressure. and it is the most sensitive peripheral sign, with it being severe AR if there is a 60 millimeter mercury difference. I've mentioned the other classical signs, but I will not be going into them in detail. I'm just mentioning it for example purposes. Once. And so coming to the diagnosis of AR. So the main diagnosis modality in AR is again echocardiography, in which we see two sort of assessments. So the jet width compared to the LVOT width gives and the vena contractor width. Now these two parameters will give us a qualitative assessment of the aortic regurgitation jet, and the calculation of the regurgitant volume, the regurgitant fraction, and the regurgitant orifice area will give us a quantitative assessment. Now, on echocardiography, if the patient has a short deceleration time on aortic flow velocity, or there's an early closure of mitral valve, these are indicators of increased LVEDP or progression of AR. The pressure half time of less than 300 milliseconds is also an indicator of rapid equilibration of aortic and LV diastolic pressures. And a semi-quantitative assessment that we can use on echocardiography is diastolic flow reversal during diastole in the arch of aorta. So coming to the stages, now like AS, the stages of chronic AR in 2020 guidelines is stage A is at risk of AR, again bicuspid aortic valve or any connective tissue disorder. Stage B is progressive MR, in which we have mild MR to moderate AR, mild AR to moderate AR. Stage C is asymptomatic severe AR, in which C1 is normal LVF and LVS end systolic dimension is less than 50. And C2 is depressed LVF or an end systolic dimension of more than 50, or a better parameter will be a index LV end systolic dimension of more than 25 mm per meter square. And stage D is symptomatic AR. So, like I mentioned, at stage A is at risk of AR. Stage B will have mild AR. Now, the grading system for this is if the jet width is less than 25% of LVOT, vena contracta 0.3 centimeters, regurgitant volume per beat is 30 ml, regurgitant fraction is less than 30%, or effective orifice area is less than 0.1 centimeter square. And moderate AR, jet width is 25 to 65% LVOT, contracta is 0.3 to 0.6. Regurgitant volume is 30 to 60, and fraction is 30% to 49%, and effective regurgitant orifice area is 0.1 to 0.29 centimeter square. Coming to asymptomatic severe, so in severe AR, if the patient has jet width area of more than 65% of the LVOT width, vena contracta of more than 0.6, they might be they will be a holodiastolic flow reversal in the proximal abdominal aorta or arch of aorta. Regurgitation volume is more than 60 ml per beat. The regurgitant fraction is more than equal to 50%. ERO is 0.3 centimeter square, and the patient might have features of LV dilatation in this case. And symptomatic severe AR, again, it's severe AR, and but it has symptoms. So the medical therapy that is recommended in AR is, if a patient is presenting with heart failure, first of all, we'll try to control the heart failure. If the patient does not have heart failure, then vasodilating drugs are recommended if the patient has hypertension, because they will reduce your systolic blood pressure without reducing the heart rate. Now that's very important, because in case if we give these patients beta blockers, that will decrease the heart rate, thereby increasing the time for the valve to become incompetent and further increase AR severity in these patients. And other therapies that can be used in patients who are at a very high or prohibitive surgical risk to improve their symptoms, that can be again ACE inhibitors, ARBs, or sacubitril plus valsartan. These are helpful in alleviating symptomatic relief, but they will not help in progression of the disease. The surgical indications for AR are namely class 1 indication of symptomatic severe AR, asymptomatic severe AR with systolic dysfunction, or asymptomatic severe AR which is undergoing other cardiac surgery. The class 2 indication is asymptomatic severe AR with an end systolic dimension of more than 50 millimeter or an indexed value of more than 25 millimeter per meter square, or moderate AR with concomitant other surgery. And class 2B indications is asymptomatic severe AR with progressive decline in LVF or a progressive increase in the end diastolic dimension of more than 65 millimeters. So this is the algorithm that is there for surgical indications. Coming to the evidences, so in Saisho et al. In 2015 published a paper in which they reviewed long-term results of AVR for chronic AR to examine what factors affected the normalization of LV function. And the conclusion they came up to was the guideline that we just used, that for preservation of post-op normal LV function, the AVR should be performed before the indexed LV end systolic dysfunction reaches 26.7 millimeter per meter square. Another paper which said this almost same thing was Yang et al. In 2019, in which they followed 748 patients, and they concluded that patients with an end LV ESD indexed of more than equal to 25 millimeter per meter square had increased risk of death if not treated properly. Which this was the result that they had posted. So, like I said, in patients who had an LV ESD of index of more than 25 millimeter per meter square, patients who did not get operated and did not have an AVR had a lower survival compared to patients who had underwent an AVR. So the surgical techniques that we can use for aortic regurgitation is either aortic valve repair. Now that will depend on a couple of things, because the success or the durability of repair is determined by the quality of the cusp tissue available. So basically, in conditions in which the cusp tissue is inherently of good quality, there will be a better result. So, for example, patient with bicuspid aortic valve or myxomatous degeneration, they have better results compared to patients in which the leaflet tissue is not of very good quality. For example, patients with rheumatic involvement in which there's thickening or severe calcification, or there is outright destruction of the leaflet due to endocarditis. And in cases in which we cannot repair the valve, we will proceed with aortic valve replacement. So coming to the techniques, so the techniques can be divided into certain levels at which we are fixing the functional aortic annulus. Now that can either be at the cusps or the subaortic segment, the STJ junction, and out aortic root. Now, before that, before explaining this, I would like to come to the classification. Now, this classification has been made just to aid our approach for repair. So it is something similar to the Carpentier classification of the mitral valve. So in patients who have a type 1 aortic insufficiency, this is a better diagram. So patients who have a type 1, basically the cusps are normal or maybe perforated, but basically the issue is just is a dilatation of the functional aortic annulus. Now this can be for multiple reasons. That patient can have an aortic aneurysm, patient can have aortic dissection. So in patients who this has been further divided into 1A. So in 1A, the dilatation is till the ST junction and does not involve the sinuses of Valsalva. So the primary repair techniques in these patients will be either in STJ remodeling with an ascending aortic graft. The secondary technique that can be used in case of annular dilatation in this patient is a subcommissural annuloplasty. In 1B, the dilatation has involved the sinuses of Valsalva, in which we'll have to go ahead with the root aortic valve sparing root replacement procedure, which can either be reimplantation or remodeling. In types 1C, there is dilatation of the ventricular aortic junction. So at this point, we have to the only repair technique available to us will be a subcommissural annuloplasty. And 1D is given to patients who have a perforation in the cusp. Otherwise, the aortic annulus and the dimensions are okay. So in this condition, we will go for an autologous or bovine pericardium patchplasty. Type 2 AR is for patients who have a cusp prolapse, which can occur because of degeneration conditions or bicuspid aortic valve. The repair techniques I'll be coming to in detail will be free margin plication, free margin resuspension, or triangular resection, coupled with a subcommissural annuloplasty. And type 3 aortic regurgitation is because of cusp restriction due to diseases like rheumatic valve disease or severe calcification. Now, I'll be coming to the results later, but these are the most difficult to repair and also do not have very good results compared to the other two. But the repair technique that can be used in these cases is shaving of fibrous bands or decalcification. So, like I mentioned, these are, I've mentioned them there also, but these are the repair techniques, and particularly in patients with cusp prolapse, free margin plication and free margin suspension have given good results. So coming to the technique, so the exposure and assessment of the aortic valve is similar in all cases, in which we'll go for a sternotomy. We'll go for an arterial cannulation, which is distal to any disease aortic segments if they are present in cases of aortic pathology. And after cardioplegia, we'll do a transverse aortotomy and take 3 commissure stay sutures at the 3 commissures, and we'll retract them perpendicular to the plane of the annulus so as to permit to show us the physiological aortic valve closure position. To assess the coaptation of the leaflets, another thing we can use is a Fretter stitch, in which we take bite through the nodulus of Aranti of the adjacent leaflets to assess the coaptation of the cusps relative to each other. So starting with subcommissural annuloplasty. Now this is done basically just to reduce the circumference of the subaortic segment, in which we take a stitch from the base of the cusps, the adjacent cusps, through the interleaflet triangle between the 2 cusps. Now this basically, because we're taking a pledgeted stitch through and through, this will reduce the width of the interleaflet triangle and improve cusp coaptation also by reducing the circumference of the subaortic segment, and will also help stabilize the ventricular aortic junction. Now, because there is a risk of progressive aortic dilatation in patients of bicuspid aortic valve, it is not always this particular repair technique on its own is not very sufficient. Coming to the cusp repair techniques for cusp prolapse. So the first technique that we have is the free margin plication, in which again we in this particular photo 2 cusps are normal and there is 1 cusp which is prolapsing because of excessive tissue. So again, we'll take a Fretter stitch to assess the prolapsing leaflet. We'll take a stitch from the aortic side to the ventricular side by pulling the forceps in one direction. Once you've taken that stitch from midline, we'll pull the cusp to the other side with the forceps and take another stitch from the aortic side to the ventricular side. What this will do is it will put the excessive tissue, whatever excess tissue we have, between the 2 stitches. So once we tie the knot, basically it'll crumple up the excess tissue and improve the coaptating surfaces of the leaflets. Now that's 1 stitch. We can continue it till the belly of the cusp by either an interrupted suture or a continuous suture technique. And if there is a lot of significant tissue, along with this, we can first triangularly resect the cusp tissue and then primarily approximate them. The second lesion. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, sir. The second technique that we use is free margin suspension, in which again a Fretter stitch is applied in the normal cusps and the prolapse cups is compared to the adjacent leaflets. In this, we take PTFE sutures, in which we'll take a bite through the commissures, and after taking that bite, we'll take one out of the PTFE suture and run it as a continuous running fashion over the free margin of the cusp. After that is done, the second PTFE is again passed in the same fashion to the midpoint of the prolapsing cusp. Length. I'm sorry, sir. Can you just give me 2 minutes? Somebody at the door. Just 1 second. Sorry, sir. 1 second. I'm sorry about that, sir. So. So once we have done that from one side, we'll repeat the same maneuver from the other commissure to the same midpoint of the cusp. And once we have done that from both the sides, we'll take, do gentle traction with the help of forceps, so that because of the continuous sutures, the free margin will get sort of the length will decrease because of the traction that we have done with the PTFC sutures. So coming to the restrictive aortic cusp, so this is used in type 3 lesions. Again, like I said, they're more challenging and have poorer outcomes. They include localized shavings of the aortic valve for fibrous bands or decalcifications. This basically, we do this to improve the mobility while leaving the cusp surface intact. If some resection has to be done in cases of infective endocarditis, we can put patch material. But again, presence of restricted disease and use of patch have both been associated with reduced repair durability. The Budwanian et al. In 2009 published a series of 264 patients with elective aortic valve repair, in which they had 153 patients of type 1 dysfunction, 134 of type 2, and 40 had type 3. And 36% had more than one identified mechanism. At midterm follow-up, there was 47 months and revealed a late mortality rate of 4.2. The important point was that recurrent aortic regurgitation and freedom and AV reoperation at 5 years, the freedom from that was the results were good for type 1 and type 2 at 88.3 and 82.9%, sorry, 95.5%. But type 3 had at only had a reduced poorer result compared to type 1 and type 2 at 76%. This was a study they had published. So like in this graph on the right side, we can see that the freedom from aortic insufficiency and aortic valve reoperation for type 3 was poorer compared to type 1 and type 2. And Dr. Sampath Kumar and Sachit Narwar have also published the series on rheumatic aortic valve repairs, in which they had given a result of 95.2% and from actuarial free survival, report reoperation free survival, and freedom from significant aortic stenosis regurgitation was 52.4% in these patients. Coming to bicuspid aortic valve. So bicuspid aortic valve is I've completed AR. So coming to aortic valve, bicuspid aortic valve is a common congenital anomaly that affects 0.5 to 2% adults.
It has anything more in AR?
Sir, Ozaki repair I have to cover.
No, you've already completed 1 hour of lecture. I think we should call it a day. How many slides do you have?
Sir, I've got about 15, 20 more.
So I think bicuspid aortic valve we can do some other time.
ठीक है.
Ozaki, it's a part of the repair thing you're showing, or it's part of pediatric repair you're showing? You can now straight away go to the Ozaki procedure.
So I presented the steps and the results, sir.
Yeah, go to that.
So,
what were the previous slides?
Sir, for bicuspid aortic valve repair.
Okay, repair है तो ठीक है कर दो. Okay, sorry.
Okay, sir. Should I do bicuspid, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, sir. So bicuspid aortic valve, the patient may develop isolated AS or AR or combination of both. Another point that you have to remember in these patients is that these patients have a risk of having aortopathy. So these patients have a 20 to 40% risk of aortic aneurysms. The types of AR bicuspid aortic valve is the type 0 or type 1. The more prevalent one is type 1. Type 0 do not contain any median raphe and have symmetric aortic sinuses, 2 commissures, and a symmetric base of leaflet implantation. Type 1 are more prevalent. They have a median raphe on the conjoint cusp, which connect two smaller cusps. And this raphe is sort of like a pseudo commissure with a lesser height compared to the other commissures. And this is asymmetric distribution of the aortic sinuses. Repair that we use in type 0, because usually the aortic regurgitation because of excessive tissue because of cusp prolapse. So the degree of the prolapse can be assessed by comparing the prolapsing cusp to the non-prolapsing cusp. If both the cusps are prolapsing, then the goal is to put them towards the midpoint of the sinus of Valsalva. The repair techniques that we can use are free margin plication or resuspension. And if fibrotic areas or calcium is present, then we can shave that off or decalcify it. In type 1, in which the raphe is present, usually the issue that causes aortic regurgitation in this patient is a restrictive or a fibrotic raphe, which causes regurgitation. So in this, either we shave off the raphe, or if it's very fibrotic or calcified, we can remove it altogether and by doing a triangular resection. And after removing it by a triangular resection, we can either primarily approximate the cusps, or you can use a pericardial patchplasty, like I've showed in these slides. So in this, the raphe was restrictive and calcified, so we did a triangular resection followed by a primary approximation, or if the tissue was we removed a lot of tissue, then we can do a pericardial patchplasty. This is the recommendation. So again, if there's a type 0, we'll go straight away for a cusp prolapse repair. If there is type 1, then we'll have to see whether it's fibrous, in which we can shave it off and do a repair. Or in case we have to do resection, then we'll have to either primarily approximate it or use a pericardial patch. So Ozaki procedure is one procedure that has been introduced by Ozaki, the Japanese surgeon. So in which we use the patient's own native autologous pericardium to to make new cusps. So it's aortic new cuspidization, in which, and in this can be used in any pathology. Basically, we can use it in aortic stenosis or regurgitation or endocarditis. The advantages is because we are preserving the natural aortic root expansion, and there's a maximal effective orifice area. And these patients in the paper described by Ozaki they were discharged only on antiplatelet therapy, which was further discontinued after 6 months. So the steps that he used, he harvested the pericardium and treated with 0.65 luteal solution for 6 minutes. After which, patient was put on CPP and cardiopulmonary were administered. After doing an aortotomy, the diseased aortic segments were excised. In his paper, he has mentioned that he has used special Ozaki sizers with which he has sized the cusps. And after sizing the cusp, using the sizer, he has fashioned the leaflet from the pericardium. And once that is done, then they stitches the leaflets to the annulus using a continuous Prolene suture. One important part that you have to remember while suturing is that at the central part of the cusp, the suturing ratio has to be 2:1, in which, for example, at the free edge, at the cusp, we have to take a 2 millimeter bite, and at the annulus, have to take a 1 millimeter bite. And while we're moving towards the commissure, it becomes 1:1. So what this will do is sort of form a belly of the cusp, so that there's a dilatation there and there's coaptation. And when the sutures are reach the commissure level, the adjacent cusp sutures are tied together. Alternative that can be used instead of using the Ozaki sizers is that the base of each cusp attachment to the annulus can be measured with a silk thread. Now, this is to the reference that I had mentioned earlier, that the height and the width of the cusp in a normal leaflet are almost equal. So once we measure this, we can use this measurement to again fashion our the pericardium. Another the measurement that you can use is the aortic annulus sizer. So once we size the aortic annulus, the diameter in millimeters is equal, can be used as equal to the height and the width of the neocusp free margin. And the silk thread that we had used to again measure the base can be used to form an arc to fashion the neocusp. Ozaki in 2018 had published his midterm results, in which he had shown that there was no conversion to prosthetic valve replacement. The post-op revealed a peak pressure gradient of average of 15.2 8 days after surgery. Freedom from death was 85.9%, and incidence of reoperation was 4.2, and recurrent moderate aortic regurgitation of greater was 7.3%. This was the study they had published. And in this study, like I just said, that they had a survival of 85.9%, with the cumulative incidence of moderate AR of 7.3. In 2019, again, Ozaki had published a 12-year follow-up of 1,100 patients, in which he had shown there was an overall survival rate of 84.6%, and freedom from operation was 95.8% at 12 years. So that's about it.
Yeah, this was a good presentation. a couple of comments that I have to make is yes, that I've already mentioned that aortic stenosis we should have completed by completing the management of low flow, low gradient aortic stenosis, both with the reserved ejection fraction and with reduced ejection fraction. And in the reduced ejection fraction, contractile versus non-contractile, patients with a contractile reserve and patients who don't have a contractile reserve. So that we can this thing in the next class.
Yes, sir.
You have covered the indications. I would just like to reiterate the fact that both AR and MR are two lesions that two valvular lesions that load the left ventricle. But you
Yes.
must understand that the definitions of LV dysfunction and LV dilatation are different for AR and different for MR in terms of indications for surgery. A normal EF for mitral regurgitation has been defined as 60%. Anything less than 60% is defined as LV dysfunction. Whereas for aortic regurgitation, the LV ejection, normal ejection fraction is the regular ejection fraction of 55%, right? And
Yes.
other thing is about the end systolic dimensions. Uh, this is based on the natural history of the disease. So whenever you have end systolic volume going higher than 4.5, or in the latest indications where you can do repairs more than this thing, then you have to intervene in mitral regurgitation. This is slightly more liberal for AR. We wait till about 5 or index to 25 millimeters per square meter. So these two things that you must remember, because otherwise, it is the same LV, decompensation of LV. But the
Yes.
definitions of decompensation are different for both AR and MR, and that should be kept in mind. Uh, when you talked about repair and subcommissional angioplasty, these days there are certain external rings, reinforcing rings. Some people prefer to use these external rings because you had already mentioned that these ventricular aortic things keep dilating. So some
Yes.
people think that external rigid rings are a useful adjunct in an aortic valve repair. Uh, in the repair, if you look at, you have described basic repairs, but today repair has gone a little more complicated. Schaffer from Hamburg is one of the leading proponents, and they have something to measure. So these days, despite all, you do all this to measure there is a certain height that you need to achieve when you do a repair, and there is a certain height of coaptation, about 3 millimeters of coaptation needs to be achieved when you uh, if you want to have a long-term successful repair. So I think those measurements, of course, you did mention them in the anatomy part of it, but Scheffer has got his. Today there are instruments available to measure the circumference, the height, so that at the end of the repair you should. Now that's how you plan your repair, that you want to achieve this much height for this much circumference. So, like you have aortic valve sizes, similarly you have cusp sizes.
Okay, sir.
So that was a certain thing that I wanted you to incorporate, because the repair has evolved to a more this thing. There are more variables to be adjusted. And in terms of Ozaki, you mentioned about 2:1, 3:1, but today the Ozaki procedure has become very mathematical. They have cusp sizes, and even they have templates for you to stitch so that you don't make any mistakes in terms of distancing.
Okay, sir.
So, they have templates. You use those templates to guide your stitching. So that is there. But I have my objection because it is autologous, it is glutaldehyde treated. So I really wonder how we can achieve longevity for something that has consistently failed in the history of cardiac surgery, glutaldehyde treated pericardium, because it is prone to calcification, fibrosis, and retraction. However, something very interesting I noted for the first time, that Ozaki's procedure were mostly done for very elderly. The mean age you said was 70 years.
Yes, sir.
So So basically, it's used it in very advanced stage in lieu of a tissue valve. Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you, sir.
Raja.
Yes, sir. I think regarding Ozaki, I would for sure say that this is something that need not be adapted for congenital for sure, because the misconception that lot of cardiac surgery people have is that this is a repair technique and repairs are best for children who need to grow. I think this is the worst thing that we can offer a child. Although it looks lucrative, it looks theoretically very nice. I wanted to bring this to the attention that 71 is the median age, and he says that they have freedom from survival. How freedom from reoperation? At 71, if we do a aortic valve replacement with a bioprosthesis, how many times have we replaced it? The patient usually is gone by the time you're talking about replacement of a 71-year-old aortic valve. So, I mean, nowadays the aortic valve available bioprosthetic valves, they are themselves, good. They give a 20-year or a 15 years things. The other AR
especially
stuff
when
that
you're doing them at 70-year age. Yeah.
yes, yes. So you have the natural longevity is only another maybe 15, 20 years anyway. The one part that AR Avyam needs to consider, maybe now, maybe later, I don't know, is the one that is associated with VSD. The uh, the the Trussler repair.
Yes.
And that I don't know how much we have understood this. And I think the use of aortic regurgitation repair techniques for a congenital surgeon are on the horizon now, because we have all our newborn surgeries where aortic root is handled. Say, for example, an arterial switch operation. All of those patients will eventually come back with neo-aortic dilatation and AR. So congenital cardiac surgeons also need to appraise themselves with techniques of repair of children who have been treated for neo-aortic interventions in the newborn period, and maybe 20 years down the line, we are all seeing them coming back with dilated aortic roots with or without AR, but they are eventually it's going to happen. As the root dilates, the AR will happen. So we have to keep ourselves appraised with that also. And I think AS has not been completed. I think as Dr. Dubey said, that we need to address that. We've not spoken about Ross procedure, etc. Root enlargement. I don't. Maybe that's the part of something else.
So that the root, aortic root is the next lecture. So we're going to put in there.
Yeah, indications for balloon dilation of aortic valve. Aortic stenosis में balloon dilation का role नहीं आया.
Abhyam, this is what I think. You must approach us when you're making approach any one of us, because I thought aortic stenosis by itself is a huge topic. Like you have, I mean, congenital AS to rheumatic AS to degenerative AS. So it's a very vast topic, and I think at times you should be able to take some guidance, because trying to mix up the whole of aortic valve in one lecture becomes very difficult. I think we take one thing at a time, complete it, and understand that. So that's what I tried to stop you at aortic regurgitation. I thought you had some more of aortic stenosis coming. So I think next time, whenever you guys do, at least before you start, you should at least make a plan of what you're going to present. AS, AR, that's half the textbook completed.
That's what I said, sir, last time. No, we have this cursory, all three moderators' name, all the whole department's moderator name sitting there. We don't even know who moderated the actual session. I've requested them multiple times, that they have decided not to listen to me. I don't know why three moderators are required for one topic here.
I meet them every day. They're on my rounds every day. I ask them, but I mean, then I believe, somebody else is moderating, so I don't ask them. But
वो passing the buck हो जा रहा है, sir, and probably they are also taking it lightly. So we need one name. All of you listen. We need one name, the person who has moderated, so that he takes the credit, discredit, which way you are.
And moderator, but it has to be verified by one of the four senior consultants also. And all presentations should be shown once to your moderator at least 3 or 4 days prior to presentation, because if you need to make changes, you should have time to incorporate it sensibly. Yeah.
Chalo, I
Okay.
think that's it.
Chalo, anyway, good,
Right.
decent presentation, but you tried to cover too much in too little time.
Presentation was good. Presentation was good. Thank you, sir.
Okay, any questions? No questions. It was pretty lucid. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, sir.